Our guest today, and personally speaking, is Luke Russert, who has written a great book, a memoir. Look for me there, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and Emmy award-winning journalist and author Luke Russert joins me now. Luke worked for NBC News as a broadcast correspondent from 2008 to 2016. He's the son of the news legend Tim Russert and Vanity Fair writer Maureen Orth. In 2016, Luke went on a global journey spanning 67 countries for more than 3 years. In his recently released book, Look for Me There, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself, he delves into the journals that helped chronicle his journey to deliver a compelling examination of self-discovery through loss and grief. Luke is here with us today to talk about his deeply personal journey, why he decided to step away from journalism, his Catholic faith, and living with the loss of a loved one. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, the great writer, the great communicator, Luke Russert. For our viewers and listeners, the book we're talking about is Look for Me There, and it is a book that made me laugh a lot because Luke is a very funny guy, but also made me cry, and I'm sure connected to that was the loss of my mom recently. But Luke, it is a great book. I'm not surprised it's on bestseller lists, and I thank you for writing it. But I want to take you back in time. About a year before your dad passed, through the National Bishops Conference, they arranged for me to do an interview for a TV show that I was hosting at the time. So I got to interview your dad, which was a great honor. But it wasn't unusual for me to end the interview with this question, which I asked him. And I said, so you have all these awards. You're this incredible journalist. You're well known, well respected, well loved. I said, Tim, I hope you go on forever. But if today you were called home to God, what's your greatest legacy? And he said, the fact that I'm the father of Luke Russert is my legacy. And I remember how great I thought that was, but also thought at the time, wow, that's a heavy burden for any kid to carry, you know?
Right,
Here's
right.
this great man, and he's saying, my legacy is my son. So I know you get into it in the book, and I want our listeners and viewers to read the book for sure, but has that been for you too heavy a burden or a burden you carry lightly?
It's a wonderful question. One of the things my dad used to always say was that when he was long and gone, that he really felt that the good Lord would judge him more about how he was a father than what he did professionally. And he sincerely believed that and imparted that on me frequently. I think that when I hear things of that nature, um, there is the verse that comes to mind, Luke 12:48, to whom much is given, much is expected, which was something that was often spoken around our home. And I struggled with that for some years, trying to understand the true meaning behind it and whether that meant that you were supposed to do great things, big things, that is really where it's at. And I came to realize through my own journey and through my own struggles and peaks and valleys that I took that to really mean what my father used to always say to me, especially if I was going away for some period of time, which was study hard, laugh often, and keep your honor. And I thought that was sort of the expectation in a way, which was that you've been blessed with so much and you should do great things, but most importantly, be a good person and be a person that walks in the ways of God. And I've tried to do that. I'm not always perfect, but that is something that I've carried from there.
Luke Russert is our guest. Luke, that line you just mentioned is one I had underlined in the book because I wondered, what do you think he meant by keeping your honor? And has it been something that you did naturally, or did you have to work for it?
Well, I think anybody in today's society, you have to work to keep your honor, right? I mean, there's different types
Yeah,
of honor, right? There's it's
right,
it's the honor of paying your subway fare versus the
right.
honor of being an honest person. But I think what my dad was sort of getting to was it's pretty obvious to know when someone's doing something the right way. And one of the things that he was very conscientious of was the common good. And are you doing something for the benefit of the person next to you? I mean, one of the things he used to like to say is there's no better exercise for the human heart than reaching down to grab somebody else up. And that's sort of all I've always sort of seen that. I think we as humans, of course, we're going to fail. We are not perfect beings at all. Sin is around us and we fall victim to it. We have bad days. I'm right about that. But I think that there is a very strong compass that can be set by our parents, by our faith. That's one that is very fundamental to living a fulfilled life. And I was very fortunate to get that from both of my parents. I often tell the story of my first recollections of Mass, where I would play with my Matchbox cars, about 3 or 4 years old in the pew, and I didn't know why am I here? There's these lights, and there's these stained glass windows, and there's a guy talking, and people sort of are singing and they're chanting, and it was all sort of strange from that 3 or 4 year old's mind. But I always remember I asked my father once, and it's one of my first memories. I said to him, why are we here? What? And he goes, look at you. And he goes, you're well fed. You have a roof over your head. You have clothes on your back. You have a lot in this life. You need to take 1 hour a week to say thank you. And it made so much more. It made so much sense, right? That, and I've always remembered that as a young kid. Like, yeah, it's just a time to reflect and be so thankful and humbled by what you've obtained.
He's so right. God, we have the big pre-Cana program here for the kids getting married, and when they talk about all their excuses for not going to mass, I say he gives you 168 hours every week. Can you find 1 week to hang out with the Lord and say, "Hey, I have a good life"? One of the things I loved about Look for Me there in the whole book, throughout the book, that one of the things we celebrate is not just your journey or your dad, but someone who I think gets underplayed sometimes, but you don't. Your mom, Maureen, extraordinary woman in so many ways, as you point out. But when you look back at the way she raised you, let's move from dad for a second. What Maureen did in raising you, what did she do right?
My grandfather, who I never got to know, my mom's dad, was a guy named Carl Orth. Grew up in a very strict German Irish Catholic family. One of his sisters was a nun. Another one went to the convent and then got away. So very, very Catholic family. And what he instilled in my mom through his discipline was boundaries and values. And my mom, I think, tried to apply that to me in a way that I may have not been aware of at the time, especially as a young kid, especially as a young teenager. My father was a sort of, I write in the book, the good cop, and my mom was more the bad cop, more the disciplinarian. But what I realized is that my mother was somebody who was deeply moved by living out the gospel. And what I mean by that is, as a young woman, she joined the Peace Corps, went to Colombia, and built schools in the rural parts of Medellin. And for a long time, I think saw that as living out the word of God, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and would then translate that into parenting with me is that, well, you have it so good, you need to be doing more. Have you done enough today? And I don't think I was receptive to that. I think I sort of viewed it as, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm getting the good grades. I show up when I'm supposed to show up. I'm playing sports. And my mom would always ask, did you do enough? And so I write in the book, she kind of has the passion of a fiery Jesuit priest in a way, right? And it wasn't until I was in my early 30s and I started to travel with her. And I saw how she would act in these different countries where she was fearless. She would go right in with people, ask difficult questions, especially sometimes we'd be hosted by somebody and she would be like, well, why don't you go to this part of town at all? Why aren't you there? Why aren't you engaging with people? And I saw that was really shaped by the Catholic values my grandfather, who I never got to meet, he died at 58, like my father. And once I saw that that's who she was, independent of the role of mom, that that's sort of how she was raised, I began to appreciate her parenting style a lot more. She wasn't just being hard on me for the sake of being hard on me. She was being hard on me because she thought that would, as we like to say, make it easier through the gates of heaven.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about something you talk about in the book. Luke is very honest about the fact that he jumps into his media career and it does very wonderfully well with it. But just in the 3 weeks that my mom is gone, I've decided, okay, I'm going to jump back into ministry. So I baptize, I bury, I marry people, I counsel people. And then a therapist friend of mine said the other day, is all this activity a way of jumping back into life, or is it a way of avoiding the painful reality of death? How did you come to discern? I mean, I know about John Boehner's challenge to you, but I imagine that even before he said that, you knew that busyness keeps us from grief. How did you have the wisdom to say, enough with the busyness?
It's a wonderful question. I think what ended up happening with me was the offer of the position came in around late July, August of 2008. And I had a fortune cookie, ironically, that said the greatest cure for misery is hard work. And my mom, to her credit, she said to me, she goes, look, you have not grieved the loss of your dad, but you ultimately have to make this decision about whether you want to throw yourself into this job, which there will be comparisons, there's going to be nepotism charges, there's going to be questions about legacy and whatnot. And I said, well, thank you, Mom, for allowing me to make the decision. But I almost feel it's like divine intervention in a way that people see Tim's twinkle in my own eye, that I should do this job to honor him, and it is my duty to uphold his legacy and his values and keep that out there and keep that flame alive. And the other benefit was the hard work, was that when you throw yourself into hard work, when you are busy, you do not have to face that weight. In fact, I tried to outrun it for many,
Yeah.
many, many years, because for me, if I ever faced it, I would have to acknowledge that dad was really gone. And that was someone who I lived to please. That was my North Star. That was my compass. That was the person who charted the course for me. So if I had to live with that, it was going to be very difficult. And I think what ended up happening is that after doing that for many years about running away from it, I began to feel just within my body there was an emptiness. I wasn't fulfilled. Something was off, whether it was I was anxious at times or I couldn't sleep. And I always assumed that was the stresses of the job. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that was grief, that I had not really allowed myself to process who was I independent of dad? Who is I independent of, as you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, that my greatest achievement is my son? Who am I independent of that? Who is the son if the son does not know who he is? Right. And what John Boehner, the Speaker of the House at the time, I think noticed, and he's a Jesuit trained guy, and he's very similar to my father in the sense that he came from a large Catholic family, grew up as the first member of his family to go to college, paid his way through a Jesuit university by taking odd jobs. He was a janitor. My dad works as a taxi driver, worked in the rectory, etc. And Boehner was, I sincerely believe this, well, probably one of the few messengers that I would have really listened to, because he had a sense of validity in my mind. That wasn't just because he was Speaker of the House, it was because of how he grew up. And
Mm-hmm.
I look back at that now and I sort of see a divine inspiration to a degree. Is that this is someone as a messenger who I would listen to. And what he said was a very simple question, which is, what are you doing here? And I wrestled with that because I was turning 30. I felt the light at the end of the tunnel more brightly than most because my father died at 58. I lost a close friend at 27. And I realized I didn't have a good answer. It was because I thought I was supposed to do it. It was the duty that I was supposed to do it. And for many years, it allowed me to run away from the grief. But once I got to a point where, as Boehner said, you could do this job in your sleep, you start to think about other things and process other things. And I realized something was off and missing. And so that's why I left. I left for a few months just to almost have a retreat, if you will, of the mind.
Now, Luke Russert in his book, Look for Me There, talks about a lot of things. But one of the things I want to address that you also address in there is the issue of anger. My dad, 84, my mom, 102, when they went to God. So while I miss them incredibly, I know they had decent lives. Your dad went too young. I'm thinking back to 2000. My best friend dies in his 40s of a brain tumor, another priest. And I believe in the whole thing. I believe in life to come. The promises of Christ are real. I get that. But I remember going through a period of fury Not that God caused Joe to die, but that, hey, you're God. You can make things better. Was there a period when Dad passed away where you could comfortably shake your fist in God's face and know that it was okay?
It's a good question. I I think because of words that my father wrote in Big Russ and Me, which is we're all part of a grand design,
Right.
I probably already had this resigned acceptance to a degree. And I think with my
Mm,
father, the way he passed on Father's Day weekend,
yeah.
as media was changing to such a degree, it almost felt like an end of an era. It almost felt like he was called home because he had done his job at the time that he was supposed to do it, and maybe the next frontier was not for him, whatever it was. But I always took peace with that and solace with that. Where I did have anger, though, and I write in the book, is a close friend of mine named Corey Griffin, who passed away at age 27. I had dinner with him just a few hours before
Mm,
that. That was very difficult for me because all those emotions that I had had when dad died came rushing back really quickly. And I had gone to the hospital and he died in a tragic diving accident. And they wouldn't let me see him because I wasn't family, but I could see his legs from underneath the blanket. And it was so hard and so upsetting because that was why my friend Corey, this beautiful guy who I was just with a few hours ago at my birthday dinner, having dinner. Why? And I was driving home from the hospital and there was this beautiful sunrise like I had never seen before. And I looked at that, I go, okay, that's a sign that something's okay. And then of course Corey was one who had gone to Medjugorje in Bosnia and was very much a believer in the power of the Virgin Mary and the spirit of the Virgin Mary. And um, his family went there soon after, and they came back with sort of the message of Corey's all right, things are okay, and that's I think calmed my anger down a little bit. Is that there's reasons for what happens.
Luke talks about signs and signals in the book. Certainly, one that comes up time and time again is the rainbow.
Yeah.
Do you feel through these signs that Dad is communicating?
I do, and the rainbow you mentioned, when he passed away, we had a service at the Kennedy Center, and as guests were processing out, we played one of his favorite songs, which was "Somewhere Over the Rainbow."
Hmm.
And lo and behold, there's a rainbow over Washington D.C. as we're all filing into the reception afterwards. And the Iceland, I was in Iceland on the 10-year anniversary of his death, going through a difficult time, and I saw a rainbow. It was deeply meaningful, and I see other rainbows when there's moments of reflection. But I had a friend say to me soon after my father passed that you can communicate to your lost loved ones. You can get into a deep meditative state of prayer and understanding and imagine conversations, but also end up really truly having those. And I'm a big believer in that. I think, one of the things that we hear so much at mass that I think is often forgotten because society, there's such a hamster wheel mentality, right? But it's to be aware of things, to notice things. And I was very fortunate that when I began to travel and got away from the hamster wheel that I know and became more perceptive and more aware, it allowed me to get to those meditative spaces where I could, in my mind, talk to dad. And it's there's some people that look at you and they go, okay. And they do you do tarot card readings too? Right. And it's like, no, it's a deep meditative state of prayer and peace.
Yeah.
And I know not everyone gets there, but I was very fortunate that I'm able to get there every now and then, and I'm deeply grateful for it.
Luke Russert, at the very end of the book, talks about he's gone on these journeys to many countries, many cultures, but I was thinking that for a lot of us who are Catholic, sometimes we feel like all truth resides in the church and we don't have to look anywhere else. And I love at the end you kind of say what this journey has helped me to realize is that there are many places to find truth. And I'm reminded of years ago when I finally picked up the book Like Buddha, Like Christ, that I can be comfortable studying Buddhism and it's not a betrayal of my Catholic roots and stuff. But in light of the heavy Catholic culture you come from, how comfortable were you looking around at other places, other cultures, other faiths, other ways of coming to know reality and being okay with that? I'm a Catholic guy, but I'm open to everything.
One of the things you learn when you travel is that old adage that we're all trying to get to the same place, but we just take different roads to get there. It's
Yeah.
very true. And there's a reason why there's been these interfaith dialogues for such a long time, because people who are willing to open up and explore see there's a lot of similarity in different faiths, especially the Abrahamic three of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But even with Buddhism, one of the things I write in the book is the comparisons I make between Buddhism and the Jesuit Examine about living and embracing suffering. I mean, that is something as a Catholic, embracing suffering, you learn about very much so. And
Absolutely.
what I found is that by looking at these faiths and understanding these different faiths, I was actually able to understand my own faith better. And
Mm.
that was a wonderful gift, which I'm deeply, deeply thankful for. I also think one thing that spoke to me, which I was ignorant of, especially the way in which Mary is revered in Islam. I learned about that when I went to Ephesus, and that was something where seeing these Muslim women pray near the statue of Mary. It was very significant. And it sure shows the universality of faith, which is this. I personally take it to, at some point, we are all just trying to get to a place of peace and a place of acceptance and embracing that mystery of faith of what happens on the other side. And all religions, that's ultimately where they end up, right? Is in some understanding of that.
I
And I
hope
happen to
so.
like ours, but I don't discount the rest.
The book is Look for Me There, Luke Russert. So I guess Luke, one of the things that I I have a difficulty with sometimes, and maybe you do, you don't, is getting priorities right. One of the things when I was talking to your dad, I said, what's your priority? And this is a guy who, as we know, talked to everybody from presidents on through to the lowest guy on the totem pole. And I mentioned that because he said, one of my priorities, he said at that point, is I just want to make sure I can always say that where it was humanly possible, I got to Luke's games. I didn't miss his, I did what a dad should do. I got to see his games at this point in your life, and you're not a guy who's going to his son's games, but what are Luke Russett's priorities right now?
Oh, that's a good question. What my father gave me was that gift of time, and it was very honest time. One of the things I see now in my role as a godfather or hanging out with my friends' kids is they'll be there, but they're on their phone. And I'll gently nudge them. I say, you can't be on your phone the entire time. That's not present, because kids get that. They
Mm-hmm.
understand that. They see that. So I was always greatly appreciative of the fact that my father gave me so much of his time, but it was honest time. It was meaningful time. He was engaged with me and sought to understand me. My priorities on that front are I've really tried to be there for my mother, and engage with her and be aware of what she faces in a given day and her responsibilities. I've also tried to be there for friends, especially ones who are going through loss. And in my own
Mm-hmm.
life, um, I always try and make time to have that exercise of where did you do good today? Where did you do bad today? Where could, what is your understanding of the day? And I think that's incredibly important, is to have prioritize self-awareness. Because a lot of times we cocoon ourselves and don't think about our own actions as much as we should, or whether or not that was the best thing to do, or why you were feeling a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important. It's in some ways it sounds like you're trying to prioritize yourself, but it's the prioritization of your own actions and to better put yourself out into the human world and get towards that common good.
One of the things Luke Russert talks about in the book, and it seemed like it's not on the topic, but to me it really is you want to get your priorities right. You want to be a good person, but you talk about something that's a phenomenon of our age, which is trolls, Twitter, and the way in which people, usually anonymous, can be so vicious about people or what they say, what they stand for. And you faced some of that when you were with NBC. I guess I'm wondering, have you gotten a handle, Luke, on, I like to understand why people if somebody writes me a hate letter about a homily I gave, I engage them. I want to know, well,
Sure.
not so much what did you disagree with, but what makes you so angry? that you want to like viciously strike out at me. And do you understand why there's so much anger in our society? Have you got a handle on that?
Oh, I mean, part of it, I think, is that the medium now allows it to be so unpersonal, right? It's just you can be a keyboard warrior and say very vicious, mean spirited things and don't face any accountability. One of the things I like to say is that in my 8 years of being a congressional correspondent and dealing with vitriol from the left and the right and everything in between, and nepotism charges and classism charges, everything you can get. But in that entire 8 year period, I had two people actually say something to my face. Thousands on the internet. Okay. Thousands on the internet. But they were two people that actually said it to my face. And I happily engaged them because I said, if you have this amount of anger in you and you want to go back and forth, let's have a conversation. Right. Let's do that. And I think that's sad. I think we live now in an era where someone's happy to throw the arrow and there's no desire to engage in it. And try to learn as to why did you give that homily, or why did you give that report, or why are you like that? Some people are in a dark place. Some people are just angry and they feel that if they can express that, then it makes them feel good. But that's something that's scary.
Luke, you never needed to share. I told the people at the beginning of this interview, Look For Me There is your book, and it made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me think. It made me question. It brought out so many wonderful human emotions and stimulated the mind. And you didn't need to write it, but it's such a gift to us. And I hope you do write other books, and I hope you do keep using your amazing skills of communication in whatever form, because you are such a grace, such a gift. And Maureen and Tim, thank you for making this kid. But you're a wonderful gift. Thank you so much for being.
I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's been so humbling and gratifying to see the response of this book. And one of the things that I've learned, I've gotten letters from folks in their 70s or 80s that are processing grief still, and it's remarkable. And it's one of those things that I think is we open ourselves up more and we communicate more. We ultimately feel better and we understand each other to a higher level, which is where we should be.
I also thank you, Luke, of the hundreds, thousands of guests I've had on the program. One of the things I've gotten used to is, I was raised Catholic, and when I talk to a guy who's just like, yeah, I'm Catholic with all its flaws, I'm Catholic and I love my faith. And it's so refreshing. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Msgr. Thank you.
As we end today's program, if you'd like to reach out to me for any reason, you can get me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer, Personally Speaking. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.